A big part of scientific management was the breaking down of work into its component tasks, which could then be spread out amongst many workers. This is different than the division of labor in society, in which the labors of autonomous producers are coordinated through a market. Here, the labor process itself is divided and reorganized via the authority of management. We often associate this concept with assembly lines, where each worker performs a simple, repetitive task before the commodity passes to the next worker. But actually, most work in a capitalist workplace is divided up like this. We ourselves rarely see a product through from start to finish. This allows work to be reduced to just a few simple, repetitive motions requiring little skill. The worker needn't know anything about the labor process as a whole, or even know what it is he or she is making. This process is called the rationalization of work. This all has several implications. The worker loses control of the pace of work. As a cog in a much larger mechanism, the worker is forced to work at a given speed, a speed which can be controlled by management. And this in turn gives management more control over the amount of value workers produce within a given period of time. Though more and more science and planning may go into the organization of the labor process by engineers and managers, the worker understands the process less and less. The worker, instead of being a skilled craftsman with years of training, could be anyone able to follow simple directions. The traditional craft worker is undermined, and the ideal worker comes to resemble an unskilled worker drone. Unskilled labor is cheaper labor, and this raises profits. The more work is de-skilled, the more all jobs start to resemble one another in skill. It becomes easy for workers to move from one occupation to another. It is also easier to replace workers. This new labor process calls forth a whole host of new occupations. Engineering departments are created to map out shop floors, design new machines, time workers, and design labor processes. The job of management becomes too complicated for the individual capitalist to handle. The job of controlling workers is actually rationalized itself, and a class of salaried managers is created to do this work of management for the capitalist. The increasing size of these rationalized, planned factories requires a massive extension of bookkeeping. Inventories, debts, payrolls, profits, all must be tracked meticulously. The job of bookkeeper is rationalized, broken down into a large gradation of occupations, all involved in tracking the flow of value in and out of the company. The increased efficiency of labor means that there are a lot of commodities to be sold. This calls forth a tremendous increase in marketing. The job of marketing is essentially to produce the consumer. The modern capitalist firm has a huge marketing department, and this work of marketing is also broken down into all of its component pieces and rationalized. Marketing becomes more and more a part of the experience of living in a modern capitalist society. Try to imagine how different society and people would be without advertising, and you will understand how effectively marketing has been at producing the consumer.
If you want a cigarette that doesn't taste so hot or dry, then light a new long cool and get the cool taste.
So exciting, so restricting, so refreshing, it's the only
So inviting, so restricting, so refreshing, it's the only cigarette that has the taste of extra coolness. So
extra coolness.
long tight, cool tight, want a taste of coolness that only cool can give you. Yes, that only cool can give you. Yes, that only cool can give you.
Cool Filter Longs join Cool Filter Kings, the only cigarettes with a taste of extra coolness.
Now, if you're thinking critically at this point, you may be saying, wait a minute, all work in a capitalist society is not unskilled brute labor. Well, this is true. The process of rationalization of labor is the tendency in which capital moves. And this tendency is mediated by different factors, by class struggle, workers resisting rationalization. Some jobs are easy to rationalize than others. But also this tendency itself calls forth scientists to design machines, engineers to design factories, management experts. The greater the pool of unskilled workers at one pole, the more there is a need for a small amount of specialists at the other end. But the work of these specialists can also be rationalized. An important principle here is Babbage's principle, named for Charles Babbage, which states that the breaking down of a job into component parts always saves money. If you have a skilled worker like a doctor, why should this doctor waste time filling out insurance forms or doing simple things like weighing people and taking their blood pressure? You could hire less doctors if you had people like nurses to do the simpler work, secretaries to fill out forms, billing offices to bill patients, lab technicians to analyze data. A hospital is the perfect example of the Babbage principle at work. We see a gradation of skill from doctors to janitors, as management has broken up all the tasks required to run the hospital, separating out each layer of skill so as to cheapen the worker whenever possible. This is why most of your time at the doctor's office doesn't involve you actually seeing a doctor. You probably only see the doctor for 10 minutes if you're lucky. The rest of the time, you're talking to nurses, med students, and secretaries. When new industries are created, like the computer industry, there's often a large degree of skill involved in the labor process. Over time, this labor process is rationalized and skill is squeezed out of the labor process as much as possible. Computer work today is now broken up between software engineers, code writers, designing and manufacturing hardware, tech support, all sorts of different jobs. And while there's still a lot of skill that goes into computers, it has also become a lot easier to do things like replace parts, write code, design web pages. Many aspects of the computer world have become less skilled, reserving the skilled jobs for a smaller group of workers. Have you ever had a really frustrating time on the phone to a customer service representative? After going through a computerized menu for 5 minutes, listening to Kenny G for 10 minutes, you finally get a human being. But the person you're talking to doesn't know how to help you, and doesn't know anyone in the office who can help you. Customer service work has been extremely rationalized. Workers have computers which guide them through answering all of the expected questions. But if a question deviates from their script, they are totally helpless. The modern worker doesn't understand the entirety of the labor process. They are just given a tiny, repetitive task to repeat. So when the customer service agent tells you that there is nobody that can solve your problem, this is literally true. The labor process controls the worker. The worker doesn't control the work. There really is nobody there that knows what is going on or who can deviate from the script. And this is the nightmarish potential of modern capitalism. That there is really nobody that knows what's going on. We become a cog in a very large process that we can't understand. We perform repetitive, simplified tasks, and the motion of our work is controlled by forces outside of us, beyond our control. But labor hasn't always been like this, and it doesn't have to be like this. There's nothing about labor that requires it to be unskilled, repetitive, brutish, or exploitative. But once a change has become generalized throughout society, we tend to think that life has always been this way, that labor has always been a commodity, and that it is progress to attempt to cheapen labor whenever possible. From the perspective of capital, this is indeed progress, the progress of making profit. But from the perspective of humanity, there is nothing progressive or efficient about wasting human life and potential merely to feed the insatiable appetite of capital.